Great. Well, again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. As I said, my name is Janae Sargent. I use she, her, they pronouns, and I am a project coordinator on PreventConnect. And you are joining us for Health Equity in Practice, Foundations for Sexual Violence Prevention, Part 5, How to Build Cross-Movement Partnerships to Advance Health Equity. A little note, PreventConnect is a national project of Valor US, and NSBRC is a national project of Respect Together. Both projects are sponsored by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views and information provided in this web conference do not necessarily represent the official views of the U.S. government, CDC, Valor, or PCAR. As I mentioned, this is the 5th in a 5-part series. So we started with how social justice issues connect to our work to prevent sexual violence, really providing a broad overview of social justice, sexual violence prevention, and anti-oppression work. And then each session after that built on the one previous. So we talked about anti-racism and sexual violence prevention. We also talked about how we can transform our language internally to address some of the gatekeeping in sexual violence prevention, how to connect and educate around social justice issues. And then this session is focused on bringing all of that together to build cross-movement partnerships and collaborations to advance health equity. Now that we have our toolboxes kind of full of what we need to do internally, this is really focused on building authentic relationships to advance health equity and address all forms of violence. The recordings of sessions 1 through 4 are available at PreventConnect.org. Would highly recommend checking those out if you have not seen them, again, because each session builds on the other, and we've just had some incredible speakers from across the country. You can watch all of those for free. They're on our YouTube and at PreventConnect.org. Today, we're going to focus on exploring opportunities for authentic partnerships with non-traditional partners, from community-based organizations to people working in cross-secting movements. We're going to rethink our policies and processes that can create barriers to working alongside communities. And we're going to focus on how we can all create pathways for transformative collaboration to prevent sexual violence and advance health equity. So we talked about this, we've reviewed this in every single session, but what is health equity and why does it matter? Health equity is kind of a buzzword in sexual violence prevention and public health right now, and it's rooted in advancing health and well-being for everyone. So health equity means that everyone has a fair and just opportunity to attain their full health potential, and that no one is disadvantaged, excluded, or dismissed from achieving this potential. The reason I said this was a buzzword is because a lot of people are doing health equity work and not calling it health equity work, especially culturally specific organizations, even though academia and public health is really taking on the term right now. It's really important for us to recognize what the term represents and not so much focus on whether or not people are calling it health equity. We know that today people do not all have the same opportunity to attain their full health and potential. Why is that? Well, that's because of oppression and white supremacy, historical precedents, unfair policies and systems, and harmful biases and stereotypes. So if we within sexual violence prevention say that we're going to advance health equity, we have to be willing to do the brave thing and address these larger systems. In the first session of our series, we looked at this flowchart. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. If you want to find out more about it, you can go to PreventConnect and watch that recording. But really here we talked about oftentimes with sexual violence, we only see the social issues that impact us. So that's what we see. These are the issues that we confront every single day. They're the things that we can recognize walking down the street. But that's not, we can't just grab one of those and take it away, because there's a reason that social issues exist. In sexual violence prevention, if we're working in health equity, we have to look at the causes, the root causes of things. We have to look at why social issues exist. We have to look at our environments, and then we have to think about the things that create our environments. And all of that comes from oppression and white supremacy. In our second session, why anti-racism is an integral part of sexual violence prevention, we talked about connecting our solutions and our strategies to sexual violence prevention across social issues. We talked about the social determinants of health, which means how people live, play, and learn. We talked about working in across silos to prevent violence. In our third session, we talked about the ways that sometimes we can hold ourselves back as a professional movement with the terminology that we use. So if we're going to partner with people outside of the public health field, outside of the sexual violence movement, we have to think about the terms that are resonating with people and the terms that we may not necessarily need. So things like primary prevention, social ecological model, secondary, tertiary, all of our technical packages, the social determinants of health, where do those serve us and where do they hold us back? And then in our fourth session, we talked about creating shared language that resonates with people, working alongside communities, learning from them rather than presenting ourselves as the experts. This was a word cloud that we did asking what creates safe and healthy environments and communities. And the words that we got back had nothing to do with the terms that we just saw on the previous slide, or at least I don't see any of those terms here. So talking about understanding, empathy, respect, resources, support, connection, access, and collaboration. These are all the things that are important to our communities. They're important to us. They just tend to get missed when we talk about sexual violence prevention within a movement to each other. So once we've done all of that internal work, let's go back to that flow chart. So we know that we can't just work in the sexual violence prevention silos of the social issues that impact us. If we're going to zoom out and look at our environments, I don't know about you, but I am not personally an expert on income and social protection, housing, job security, healthcare, food security, education, early childhood development. It's too much for any one person. It's too much for any one movement. It's too much for any one profession. It is integral that we connect and we collaborate with people in cross-secting movements who are experts in areas that we are not. Especially knowing the history of our movement, of our professional movement, how white it is. There are some things that I'm never going to be an expert on. I don't expect myself to, and I don't expect all of my colleagues to. But we don't have to do this alone. If someone says that we need to focus, or our community is asking us to focus on housing and food security, it's not like we have to go and learn everything about housing and food security. We just have to know how to connect with the people that do without tokenizing them and using them, and how to create authentic partnerships. So I would love to hear now from you all in the chat, what are some examples of cross-movement partnerships? And when I say cross-movement partnerships, I mean people or organizations that you could connect with to address some of those environments that might be outside of the sexual violence silo, right? So who might you want to connect with if you are going to work on economic security in your community? Who might you want to connect with if you are doing youth empowerment work? So please feel free to put that in the chat, and we will kind of read out some of the stuff that's coming in. Some examples could be your local Pride Center, or your local food bank, community health center. Yeah, that's a good example, or a grassroots organization. So we'll kind of let those filter in as we move on. When I talk about traditional partnerships versus cross-cutting partnerships, oh, I love that. Mutual aid groups, music festivals, venues, banks, boys and girls clubs, local churches. Absolutely. Please keep bringing that in. When I talk about traditional versus non-traditional, I'm talking about the things that like we are used to doing in our movement, right? And when I think about my first job as a sexual violence prevention practitioner at a local rape crisis center, if you were going to say a collaboration or a partner, to me, that would be backed up by a memorandum of understanding, which is basically a contract. And it might be other sexual or domestic violence organizations, other nonprofits who had similar processes to ours, schools, carceral systems and criminal justice systems, health departments, and governments, things like that, things that run like nonprofits do. But social justice does not run like a nonprofit. If we really want to advance health equity, we have to be thinking outside of the box. And I'm seeing a lot of these in here: immigrant organizations, local organizations and small businesses, harm reduction centers, libraries, local churches, absolutely, youth, indigenous leaders, community leaders, reproductive justice organizations, community health centers. It's so important that we connect with cross-cutting movement leaders And that requires a shift to be able to do that. We can't do everything in column B the same way that we would do in column A, not get the same results, and then throw our hands up like it's not our fault. There's a lot of intentionality that we have to put into that. One second. And when I talk about intentionality, I just mean not everything is going to be backed up by an MOU. Not everything is going to be done the way that it's always been done. It really comes down to connecting with ourselves, thinking outside of the box, and where we can stretch ourselves in our work. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to our speakers today, because I could talk at you forever and that would be fine. But we know that you learn best from each other. You learn best from examples. So I am so honored to introduce Cass and Leha and Big Wind from Wyoming to take it over and talk about their incredible collaborative work with their youth summit this year. Cass, Leha, Big Wind, I will leave it to you to introduce yourselves and take it on from here.
Hi, thank you, Janae, for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Cass Burson. I'm a prevention specialist with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. And I will pass it on to you, Leha.
Leha Spoonacher, Northern Arapaho, Eastern Shoshone, Oglala, Lakota, a youth advocate with Pretty Out Consulting, work that I've been doing for the past 17 years for Native youth. And I'll go to Big One.
Hello, relatives. My name is Big Wind Carpenter. I use they them pronouns. I'm a two-spirit member of the Northern Arapaho tribe here on the Wind River Reservation. Good to be here.
Thank you. Okay, so to get started on our presentation, this is the title slide, the Wind River Reservation Youth Summit 2023. This was a logo that was created by a Shoshone tribal member from the Wind River Reservation. And then there's also the CDC disclaimer that the Youth Summit was sponsored in part by CDC funds. Next slide, please. And this was the theme for the Youth Summit, from roots to resilience, empowering ourselves and our communities for a better future. Next slide. And this was also a flyer that was created by the Shoshone tribal member. Her name is Sherilyn Jimerson. The University of Wyoming sponsored Sherilyn to be able to design the logo and the flyer for our youth summit. There was also a Facebook page that was created. And then there were t-shirts that the University of Wyoming also donated that you'll see everyone wearing throughout the presentation and the pictures provided. Next slide, please. I'll pass it on to you, Leha.
Thank you again. I forgot to mention in my introduction, I am a two-spirit member, Eastern Shoshone, Northern Arapaho, and Oglala, Lakota. So part of the history behind the Youth Summit was this was actually the fourth in the years. The Wind River Youth Summit had started in 2010, went from 2011 to 2012, and there was that kind of break in between that we needed to get in 2020 when we decided to try and bring back the Youth Summit. Of course, that was canceled due to COVID, but to have the opportunity to have it back this year was important. And you know, previous work that I've been a part of is a national group called Unity, which is United National Indian Tribal Youth, which is the largest Native American youth organization in the country. Comprises over 40 states, over 360 youth councils. throughout the United States. And we had our own youth council here on the Wind River Indian Reservation, the Wind River Unity Council, which both myself and Big Wind were a part of. And that was integral to helping us to plan youth events and youth activities like the Youth Summit this year. It really set a platform, our mentor, the late Eddie Wada, really set a framework for how we were going to help youth on this reservation. You look back at so many great leaders, and we're going to talk about one later on in the presentation, have emerged out of this network. And through unity, the opportunity to build partnerships, to build resilience, and to have this opportunity to provide something that me and Big Win have both benefited from. And so in my work, it's important that Native youth are the voices, and that they're the voices that are heard, and that our community understands that Native youth voices are integral to the success of our community. And that's why it was important to bring back this youth summit. It was important to give unity that, it was important to give our community that opportunity to see youth grow and succeed. And in this slide, partnerships are an important part to the integral success of Native youth. And in this slide, you see youth from Fort Hall who made their way down to make sure that our partnerships and that the opportunity to learn, and that this is only the beginning of what we can do here on our reservation. So I'll turn it over to Big One at this time.
Thank you for sharing that, Lehan. Like Lehan had said, both of us grew up participating in the Wind River Youth Council on the Wind River Reservation and being a part of the United National Indian Tribal Youth. So growing up, there was a lot of challenges on the reservation, and we wanted to find ways that we could impact them, or the ways that we could find solutions. Before there was like any Earth Day activities going on that were sponsored by the tribal governments, and tribal employees could be able to get paid and then still like clean up the res, do all these things. Like, we were out there as teenagers organizing these events, making sure that, just getting donations for trash bags and water, and then heading out and cleaning a lot of our roads, roadways, and housing communities. I remember when I was 13 years old, there was a special election. Our county had been found guilty of diluting Native American vote. And our mentor, Eddie, had said for us to be, that he wanted us to be at the table so that we're not on the menu. He used to say that. And that was really impactful to me as a kid, as a teenager growing up on the Wind River Reservation and going to conferences like this. So I think it's only like full cycle, very fitting that Leha and I are now planning these conferences for the next generation.
Thank you, Big Win. So leading into the next slide talks about, we've heard about Lehan, Big Win's history and being involved in Youth Summit, youth advocacy work, being involved in Unity growing up as youth. How I became involved was I started with a coalition at the beginning of January 2022 as a prevention specialist. So prior to me starting, there was a 2020 Youth Summit that was being planned back in 2020, but it was canceled due to COVID. those that were involved in that planning process were a part of the rape prevention education funds, supporting a pilot community where they were planning for a 2020 Youth Summit. They were going to, I believe, host a powwow at that time. And so during that time, I was actually working with as a victims advocate for, it was called Red Paint Alliance. So I wasn't really involved in that at the time, but then coming to the coalition, my supervisor had, suggested that, it'd be a good idea to maybe reach out to those that were involved in that 2020 planning of the Youth Summit to see if they had an interest in wanting to do a 2023 Youth Summit. And so at that time, I reached out to everyone. Everyone was very, supportive, wanting to do it. We began planning. I think our first meeting actually happened in August, and we mostly met by Zoom virtually. So when we began to meet, we began identifying partners, people in the community who we thought would be interested in wanting to be a part of this, people in the community who were already doing work with the youth and for the youth. And then, because there was always the intention that it was going to be community led, the door was always open and to inviting anyone who wanted to be a part of the planning committee. And within those meetings, we began also looking at topics, thinking of topics for the Youth Summit, speakers who could speak on those topics, scheduling dates and venues. I will say that a lot of, the planning process was not smooth. It did not go according to plan. Throughout the time, we've had to make several adjustments, like specifically with dates. The first dates that we had planned were the Youth Summit was to be held in June. And those dates just happened to be the dates that tribal ceremony was taking place, was going to happen. So out of respect, knowing that that would be a busy time for the tribal community of the Wind River Reservation, we decided to look at other dates, which eventually end up being in July. Venues, I think our initial thoughts too were knowing that the Wind River Reservation is a large area, wanting to make it accessible for youth to attend, and then also knowing that transportation would be a barrier. So we had wanted to schedule the Youth Summit to take place the first day to be held in Ethatee and the second day to be held in Fort Washakie. But then with the changing of dates, we decided to go with one location. I think a part of that too was also like summertime, like knowing that summer school was still going on at the high schools that we had reached out to see if they would allow us to host this youth summit at their facility. And then leading into the youth engagement part of it, we did have a few youth who attended the planning meetings, knowing that the times that we were meeting weren't necessarily one set time that we were meeting. We were just kind of, I guess, planning as we went along, scheduling as we went along, based on our calendars and the available times we were able to come together to meet the next time. So for the youth who were invited to be a part of the meeting, I know there were conflicts with athletic practices, needing to be at practice for sports, while also needing to focus on homework. So one way to get youth input in planning a youth summit was to put together a survey that was sent out to the schools to get feedback from the youth on the topics they would like to see throughout the youth summit, as well as their input on any other ideas, speakers, the facilitators. And next slide, please. So protocol, throughout the planning, it was probably in March to where at one of our meetings, it was brought to, my attention, and this was by a colleague, a beloved community member from the Wind River Reservation who, brought it to the attention that protocol wasn't followed. That although I am a tribal member of the Eastern Shoshone tribe, I lived here on the Wind River Reservation my whole life. But because I was the organizer employed by an outside organization, that it was important to follow protocol. So from there, a letter was drafted and submitted to the Wind River Intertribal Council secretary requesting to meet with them. And the letter, was in full transparency of what had happened, what had been planned up to that point, what we've done. That included the surveys, who was attending the planning meetings, what we had planned so far, as well as what our future plans were in planning for the Youth Summit. So also just to explain a little more, on the Wind River Intertribal Council, we have 2 tribes located here on the Wind River Indian Reservation, and both tribes have their own tribal government. Both tribes do things differently. So the Wind River Intertribal Councils, when they come together to meet as one. And so that is where Big Win and I met with the Wind River Intertribal Council and presented everything. They were fully supportive. They had recommendations and ideas. We took those recommendations and ideas and incorporated it into evening events. Next slide, and I will pass to you, Leha.
So we had 2 co-facilitators, and Chance Rush was one of them. He served as a master of ceremony. He was sponsored by the Wyoming Youth and Adult Council. And the reason why it was important, I guess, to bring Chance in was Chance has had over 20 years of motivating and inspiring youth throughout in the country. And he's, and both me and Big Win were inspired by him. We as youth, we had the opportunity to work with Chance and hear Chance speak, and the opportunity, and it was very important that for the next generation of youth on this reservation that we bring somebody like him to speak to our youth and for them to hear the wisdom that impacted us, impacted both Big Win. And Chance is, if you ever get the opportunity to hear him speak, he's inspiring, he's motivating, he's encouraging, and he's somebody that we all, should aspire to look up to and get encouragement from.
Another keynote speaker was Theta Newbreast. Theta Newbreast is works for and is the master facilitator for Native Wellness. They do a lot of things with healthy relationships. They also created a curriculum called GONA, which is the Gathering of Native Americans. And this curriculum around GONA is been utilized all over the country. And so we felt that it was really important, especially when talking about healthy relationships to kids. I think it's important that you get somebody who's funny, who can be able to like make jokes and be able to just kind of like allow for the young people's defenses to go down while they're learning some information. And so I think that it was really important, not only that they come and be able to be a keynote speaker, but to be able to work with the young kids on the reservation to tell them what healthy relationships look like and to work through workshops. I think one important part that I recognized in the healthy relationship workshop that I had never seen before was that they had separated into different groups, and there was if you were, you know, a man then and you liked women, like what was like that kind of relationship look like? And if you were a woman who was into men, like, and then if you were like a non-binary person, so it was split into like who's a healthy boyfriend, who's a healthy girlfriend, and who's a healthy partner. And as like a queer person, I've went to plenty of workshops where there's this binary where it's like, oh, well, you have to, you know, figure this out. And so for a lot of us who maybe don't even fit in the binary or have partners who don't fit in the binary, that was really important. And to see that brought to the reservation was really important as well. And the way that they handle and embody kind of that knowing that there is a queer representation on the reservation, and so there were queer youth there that were really like impacted by that, I feel. And we will go into you know, even with the what it was called, the summit was called From Roots to Resilience, like the intention for us was is that this was like a culturally centered conference for Native youth. And so as Indigenous people, ceremony is really important to us. And I think for non-Native people, people think that maybe ceremony is like something that is really serious, but for us, like life is ceremony. You know, you wake up every single day and you pray, and you make those offerings to the spirits to who you're related to. And when we hold events, it's important that we all come in a good way. So everyone, you know, will get in a circle and we'll get smudged off. And so the plants that are used when we're smudging, it not only protects us, but it gets rid of the things that we're carrying in there that don't serve us. And so we started every single day off. We asked a tribal member from each tribe. The first day was George Leonard and Daniel Oldman. Then we had a drum group come in and sing a couple songs for us. And this is the way that we're inviting our ancestors, inviting the spirits to our gathering to know that we're coming in a good way. And that second day, we had the Shoshone tribe, Arlen Shoyo, and the Big Wind Singers from Crowheart. And we wanted to ensure, I think what's really important about Native Americans is that we follow reciprocity. And so when you give something, you get something back. And so we wanted to make sure that the people who helped us with smudging us and singing for us, that they were paid for their time too. I'll pass it off to Cass.
Thank you. Yeah, I think leading into college advocacy, like knowing that all the topics that we had throughout the summit, I believe there were maybe 11 topics off the top of my head, but that they were centered around culture, around tribal culture, as well as speakers from the community who are already doing great work, either with the youth or so thinking about like the college advocacy, the University of Wyoming provided a session on college advocacy. And on the slide, I didn't get a chance to actually sit in or listen to their presentation, but I see on the slide they have the Native American Summer Institute up there. And there's a picture of Cassie Underwood to the right, and then there's a picture of Raynette Curry below in a circle with the youth. They are both staff of the University of Wyoming and tribal members from the Wind River Indian Reservation. I believe they work with the Native American Resource and Cultural Center for UW. Let's see here. I know in the meeting they talked about wanting to share stories with the youth of what they can expect when they go off to college. You know, what they can expect, you know, what the college experience is like, what it will be like. So that's that slide there. And next, I will pass it to you, Leha.
And for our uplifting Indigenous youth stories and voices, Christy is a graduate in University of Wyoming. She also is a Wind River Unity Youth alumni. And in bringing awareness to people who have gone through, you know, what both me and Big One gone through, Christy served as a ambassador for the Wind River Indian Reservation. Growing up, she also was included in the Unity 25 under 25, the 2016 cohort of Unity 25 under 25, which recognized 25 outstanding youth leaders across the country. She also was a Center for Native American Youth Champion for Change. The Center for Native American Youth was started by former Senator Byron Dorgan as part of his outreach to Native youth. And so having Christy be able to come and share her experiences of leadership was very important, and very passing on the knowledge that she learned through her time doing youth advocacy onto the next generation. So it's kind of like, as Big One stated, having become, it's a full circle moment that we're able to bring back these great leaders in our community for the next generation. And Christy is one of those people who also, like, one of her messages is that you have to have that voice, and you have to be not afraid to share your voice and to have your voice heard. And she's done that at a regional, a local, and national level.
Yeah, there was also another speaker that we had who's from the Wind River Reservation. Jason Baldez is an enrolled member of the Shoshone tribe, and a lot of their work has to do around buffalo and bison restoration in tribal lands. I remember when I grew up, him and another Arapaho man were trying to start like this warrior society, and it was to talk about how men needed to protect the women and the two-spirit and the young youth. And so we thought that it was important, when we had sent out a poll to the kids or to the young people of what do you want to see at this conference, which we thought was really important that we had that type of input. Warriors protecting women, youth, and children was one of the higher rated what the young people had wanted. And so it was really good to get him to be able to come out there and talk to young people about how men should protect women in the community and how to have that healthy relationship, and to talk about, there's a sacred feminine, but there's also like sacred masculinity, and we all have different roles. And I was able to step in and hear some of his spiel, and it was really good. And it was good for native young men to be able to hear some of that stuff. I'll pass it back over to Cass.
Thank you. Another topic that we had for the summit was substance use, abuse, and care. The tribal program, a Shoshone tribal program that presented on this or provided they provided youth talking circles with the youth for this topic. And it's actually, the name of the program is Doya Natsu Healing Center. Doya Natsu is a Shoshone word, also means medicine mountain. Holding the microphone there in the picture, that's John Oberly. He's a Shoshone tribal member who works with Doya Natsu. They also provide cultural education to the community. They do community sweats, provide support for the community. I'll pass back to you, Bigwin.
One of our other presenters was her name was Shay Badhawk. She is a Wyoming Young and Youth Adult Council member, and not only got to talk about mental health care, but also bullying. And both of these topics were really important to young people. I think they really got a lot out of the first one. When they were talking about mental health care, they kind of handed out these notebooks, these pens for journaling, and talked about how it was really important that we feel through our emotions. And I think a lot of the times, especially when you're a teenager, you're told to suppress your emotions, so I think it was really important for those teenagers to be able to hear that, especially from a young tribal member who's already went through that. And so as a person who's part of the Yaya, I think it was really important that they hear from, maybe a younger youth or a little older youth talking to the younger youth about both of those very tough subjects. And for MMIP, I'll pass it over to Leha.
For the MMIP, one of the integral parts of this youth summit, and back in 2021, the discussions was to have this youth summit focus around MMIW, MMIT, murder and missing indigenous peoples. And that whole first day was kind of, the evening event, as well as the discussion of MMIT. We had Lynette Grable, who is a national recognized speaker. She's founded her own nonprofit, Not Our Native Daughters, which also has their own website. She has her own website. She's been doing this work in human trafficking, combating human trafficking, MMIW issues. As many of you may know, that Native women have some of the highest rates of rape and being attacked and violence against them in the country. I think one statistic said that Native women 10 times the national average that are sexually assaulted or raped, and that 4 out of 5 Native women will be attacked or physically assaulted or harmed in their lives. And so, you know, it was very important to have this discussion, be a part of the summit, and to have Nanette with her expertise in the subject to be able to bring that awareness. And, you know, to especially in protecting our young men, protecting our young women, and protecting our Two-Spirit community. It's, you know, we, to this day, we still have women and children and men and Two-Spirit people going missing daily. And so it's important that this subject be brought to the forefront, and that we have partners, especially those that are on here, helping us in combating and fighting this issue.
Next slide. Suicide prevention. White Buffalo Youth Prevention Program was the program who provided the session at the Youth Summit. Those that attended our planning meetings were Richard Singer and Stefan Colite. I think you can probably not see Stefan in the picture, but he's off to the far left of the circle. He's holding the mic there. But there were also, they brought along other staff from their program with them to facilitate the suicide prevention topic. White Buffalo Youth Prevention provides education for youth that is centered in Indigenous lifeways. They also do sweats for the youth. This past summer, they did a 3-day youth summer camp that included activities such as archery, mountain biking, and fishing. Next slide.
So the LGBTQI support was, the presenter was Mateo here. Mateo, they are featured in a book along with other youth. And so it's very important, and I help co-present with Mateo, but I think it's very important when we're talking about the next generation of youth leaders to have non-binary and queer individuals and Two-Spirit individuals who are not afraid to express their identity, who are not afraid to share their perspective. And Mateo had the opportunity to do that. And one of the things that we like to highlight, I know Cass, myself, and Big One, is that this was really groundbreaking. This is the first time at any youth summit on the reservation that LGBTQI and Two-Spirit support was presented. I know for me and Big Win, you know, we talked about it, but it was very integral to have this presentation be a part, because, you know, there is still homophobia, there's still transphobia, there's still bigotry that we have to deal with even on the reservation, and especially in the state of Wyoming, which many of you are familiar with Matthew Shepard. This is to have young people be able to share their identity and to share who they were, and to bring this awareness was important. So we thank Mateo, and I was very honored to be there with him, with them, and bring in this presentation.
Big Wind, I think you're muted.
Right, my bad. Talking about Land is Sacred, there was a panel, a workshop that was held. And so what we had did was we talked about different types of medicines, and how food is medicine, and how we go out during different times of year in the summer and we pick certain medicines for ceremony, but that we still use these same medicines throughout the year. And we talked about the Arapaho and the Shoshone names of different sages, of the chokecherry, and then we then went in the process of processing chokecherries. So for a lot of people, people will say, like, people don't use chokecherries or whatever because there's arsenic in the seed and you could get sick. But indigenous people, we have traditional ecological knowledge, and so what we would do is we would grind these seeds up into a paste. We would make patties out of them, much like you make burgers, and then let them dry in the sun. The sun would pull out the poison, and then we would eat it. We'd make it into a gravy. And what we've always known, that's been turned into or proven by science, is that when you take out the seed, you lose 80% of its nutritional value. And that's that traditional ecological knowledge that we hold on to. So I think it's important. These things were passed to me by my grandparents. But now that our grandparents are passing more frequently and earlier, just making sure that that information is still shared to youth. And so it was really good we had about 7 kids come, and we just made scads of patties. And then after we were done, we kind of talked about how there's certain areas where we know to find these medicines, and we have to protect these areas so that in future generations we can still continue to find these medicines, not only for ceremony but for sustenance.
Another topic we had was safe teen driving. This was presented by Sarah Searleson, who is with the Wyoming Children's Trust Fund, and Keaton Oliver, who is Sarah's son. They both had Sarah lost her son and Keaton lost his brother in a vehicle accident. And Sarah was able to talk about, that experience from a trauma-informed lens and sharing that with youth, knowing that, last year, the high school youth experienced a loss of, their friends who were involved in a car accident. And then Keaton shared the experience from a youth perspective. Next slide, please. Wellness. So wellness wasn't exactly a topic, but just wanting to also point out that we had on-site counselors throughout the entire youth summit that provided that support, knowing that there was a lot of heavy discussions, heavy topics that would be bringing up heavy feelings for the youth. So to have that on-site support for them was really important. Also, when we were thinking about planning for the lunch, the planning committee wanted to make sure that the youth was provided with good nutritional meals to keep them energized, knowing that this youth summit was being held for 2 whole days. So wanting to make sure that they had that energy to support them throughout both days. Also, icebreakers. Icebreakers was a form of physical activity that was provided by Intertribal Wellness. And it was actually a Shoshone Business Council member who provided those icebreakers throughout the summit for the youth. And yeah, just to touch on like IndigiMills Pro, they are a native owned business from the Wind River tribal community. They provide nutritional meals. And then, so yeah, it was just basically wellness, mental, emotional, nutritional, physical health and well-being throughout both days of the summit. Also, some points that aren't listed on here is that the Johnson for Washiki Johnson O'Malley program, their parent committee provided snacks for both days of the summit that included like apples, juices, water, oranges, Rice Krispie treats, and fruit snacks. I know there was a concern for not thinking that, that was enough for the youth, like that they could maybe grab an apple or orange for breakfast the first day. But yeah, I remember expressing the concern to one of the colleagues and with the coalition, with the Wyoming Coalition, who I also work with the coalition, who is also a member of the Wind River community, letting her know like, hey, we need breakfast. It would be nice to have breakfast for, the second day. And so she worked her magic and was able to provide breakfast burritos for second day of the summit. And so very grateful to her. And her name's Sarah Robinson. So just want to uplift her in that. Next slide.
So on the community events, it was very important for us to highlight a film that was done by a tribal member of ours, Jordan Dresser, along with Sophia Barksdale, who is a film producer. And the film that we highlighted was Who She Is. It talks about several community members who were murdered or missing. Shared the stories, and it shared one story of one who is still a community member who is still her story, who is still alive, and shared her story of what she endured, being physically attacked, sexual violence. There was several community members. Kiara Crawford shared her story of her grandmother who was murdered. And one of the things that we also showcased at this film showing was a jingle dress exhibition. And the reason why the jingle dress was selected was because the jingle dress is viewed as a healing dance within our tribal communities. So we had 4 jingle dress dancers along with one of our respected community members, Sarah Robinson, who serves on the MMIW task force there, has dancers, as well as my sister, who's the education director, and another youth, other youth advocates. And again, it was just important to bring the awareness of MMIW. And to have our drum there as well, Little Braves singers who are youth, who are comprised of youth community members. But the film was powerful. And if you ever get the chance to see it, you will witness something that is both emotional and powerful. So I'll turn it over to Big One.
For the second day, we were trying to put together a youth talent show. We did have to switch venues last minute because of a funeral, which I think affected turnout. So that's something that we'll have to plan for better next time.
Yeah, I think to add on that, like knowing that we have community halls that are located here on the Winterberg Reservation. And, you know, even if you have an event that's scheduled to take place, funerals do take precedence over any other event. And so, you know, out of respect for the family and the loss of their loved one, so yeah, that was a last minute change that needed to happen as far as moving locations. So with this slide, 100 plus, so we had 100 plus youth that attended the first day. Like knowing our initial plans, we wanted to plan for 200. And then as we started to get closer, the numbers of those registered were pretty low. And so I think we went back and kind of talked about it more. And then we're like, okay, maybe let's plan for 120. So we lowered our number. So the registration that we had prior, those that registered prior to the youth summit were 60 youth. The day of the youth summit, we had a lot of youth that showed up who did not register prior to the event. There were also a lot of youth who did register that did not show up the first day. But I do remember Raynette Curry mentioning how, you know, they do a lot of work with the youth and doing youth events, and sharing that to have on-site registration, because oftentimes there are a lot of youth that don't register, or they show up with a friend who may be registered. So it was important to have that on-site registration. And second day, there wasn't as many as 100 plus that showed up, but it was still a good turnout. Like I remember the Northern Arapahoe 477 program. They do youth, provide jobs for the youth throughout the summer. And I know they had planned to attend the first day and they weren't planning to attend the second day, but they liked the first day so much that they wanted to come back for the second day. So they were there both days. And they did provide that transportation for their summer youth to attend the youth summit. I'll pass to you, Big Win. Next slide.
So I think a couple of the lessons that we have learned are that one, youth and young adult engagement. We wanted to see if the school would allow their 1 hour school time for youth to participate in planning. We sent out polls. I think it was really important that this vision was crafted with input of the people who it was meant for. Number two being that youth are leading discussions and speaking. We intentionally reached out to a few youth and young people to lead some of the speaking things, because we wanted these young people to see their friends or their cousins or people that they run into in the community being in these situations. And so with Mateo being able to run the LGBTQ, with Shay being able to speak on bullying and mental health, with Christy Wildcat being able to speak on uplifting youth and young adult voices, it was really important that they were speaking and leading those discussions. And then you could see that made an impact. I know that the Shoshone Bannock Youth Council that had came from Fort Hall for that second day, they were really vocal that second day, I felt like. So you could see how the impact made when they knew that they were in a safe environment, and that was the culture we were creating. I think another lesson that we learned is more interaction and less sitting and more movement. So I think it has to do with different ways of learning and whatnot, but youth are less engaged when listening to a lecture. When there's like a hands-on activity, or when there's even an exercise in the beginning, or there's time to maybe have conversations with your friends, like those are really, I think, proven ways to see youth engage. And so just trying to make the day fun. So thinking about in future years how we can make I think we did good this year, but I think just ensuring that there was more time outdoors, or if there was like an afternoon outdoors, something like that. Number 4 being transportation. The Wind River Reservation is 3 times the size of Rhode Island. And so a lot of people don't understand how huge of a landmass we have. And a lot of these communities on the reservation are spread out between one another. It takes you 2 hours to get from one side to the other, or at least an hour and a half. I think when we were leading up to it, we were trying to find different ways to provide transportation, but just thinking about that in the long term. And I think if we had I think in the future, making sure that that's in the budget is a line item for transportation, so that we can ensure if we do need to rent a bus, that's what we have to do, and then creating this kind of like schedule. And then I think they kind of feed into each other, 4 and 5, and so it's like location. There's a lot of people spread out, but there's like 4 communities, like loose communities on the Wind River Reservation. There's Arapaho, Ethity, Crowheart, and Fort Washakie, and they all have different populations of people. So like Ethity and Arapaho are usually Northern Arapaho, and then Crowheart and Fort Washakie are majority Shoshone. But that's not guaranteed, and there's actually a lot of people who have both Shoshone and Arapaho ancestry. But it can be perceived that if you have, a conference in one community, that you're favoring that community. And so we want to make sure, and we did have our evening events spread out throughout the community to try to like make that better. But I think that there's other ways that we're going to have to think about that. Location is very important, and maybe it serves better if it's in the middle of the reservation, or if it is alternating days, like Cass had talked about. That was something that was talked about at one point in time, but we ended up having it that day.
And talking about the partners and the sponsors, listed is all of our sponsors and our partners, Eastern Shoshone Tribe, the Northern Arapaho Tribe, Arapaho Business Council. Having the support of both the business councils was integral to our success, and they both supported the Youth Summit, the Northern Arapaho Drug Endangered Program, the 477 in Eastern Shoshone 477 is where we got a lot of majority of our youth attendees. And the Intertribal Wellness provided icebreakers as well as the meal. The Greater Yellowstone Coalition, Laura Notsu, who presented, Eastern Shoshone Victim Services, who provided support, University of Wyoming, who helped with our t-shirts, and also presented Eastern Shoshone Education, my sister Harmony, who was on the original Youth Summit Planning Committee. And she also was integral in the success of the earlier Youth Summits that I had talked about from 2010 to 2012. The Wyoming Outdoor Council, Big Wim's a part of, Pulaski VOM, White Buffalo, Central Wyoming, Wyoming Youth and Adult Council, Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. So these are our sponsors, our community partners. This wouldn't have been a success without each and every one of them. And I believe Susie Marcus is on. Susie played a big integral role as well. We recognize her in that.
Next slide, please. Gratitude. Yeah, just want to lift up everyone that played a part in this. I think to name off the ones that are in the pictures, there's the big group photo of us, and a lot of the pictures shared are missing a lot of the community members who were involved in this. Like, I remember in one of the pictures, I wasn't even aware that a picture was being taken. I just happened to walk out of the kitchen area and they were already, posing for a picture, and they hollered at me and they're like, get up here, get up on stage, and, we're taking a group photo. And, but yeah, just so many who were a part that aren't included in the pictures. But yeah, in the group photo, there's Susie Marcus. She is also works with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. She's a interim co-director. And then there's LaDawn Olson, who is also with the coalition and a beloved community member of the Wind River Reservation. And then, of course, there's Leha, Joseph Gonzalez. He was a counselor. He was previously employed by Doya Natsu. And then Cassie Underwood, Raynette Curry with University of Wyoming. Ciara Astorga, she was with Central Wyoming College. And then there's Harmony with Eastern Shoshone Education, Cassie Weed with Central Wyoming College, Chance Rush, Manuela Twitchell, she was a counselor. She's also a counselor for Fort Washakie School. She's a beloved Wind River community member. Theta, Trish Hill, myself, and Victoria. Victoria and Trish both work with Eastern Shoshone Education with Harmony. But yeah, just feeling the immense gratitude throughout the entire process of everybody within the community who was able to come together and plan and be a part of the planning process. I couldn't help but feel emotional. And even towards the end, just, having that connectedness, that closer feeling to everyone that was a part of this. I know I spent a lot of time outside of work, my personal time. I wanted to be able to provide everyone with a gift to show my appreciation for them. So outside of work, I had made these dentalium necklaces, often asking some people, some of the planning committee, what's your favorite color? What's your favorite color? And yeah, I made a few of the necklaces based on their favorite color. But yeah, I just really wanted to show my gratitude for each and every one of them. Thank you. And yeah, I know there are probably several more that I didn't list name. Want to apologize for that. Next slide. So still to come is a debrief meeting. Wanting to do a debrief of the youth summit. Like I know there are talks about, we don't want this to end. We want this to continue into the future for the youth. And it's important to also come together and have a debrief meeting, inviting partners and sponsors, youth who attended to come, speakers, anyone who would like to provide feedback or their input on how the youth summit went. That's the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cass, Leha, and Big Wind. It was incredible to see that the work that you all have done, and in collaboration as well. We have a few minutes left. If anyone has questions and they would like to put them in the chat, we would love to uplift them. I am curious, maybe while we're waiting for questions, this is obviously something that you all have put so much time and intentionality and commitment into building with each other. It's not like you just decided to do this overnight, and it did. I am curious what advice you have for organizations or for people who are watching this and saying, I really want to do something like this, but I don't know where to start. What are those kind of intentional steps at the beginning before you even get to an event or a council or the stuff that you're doing together? Like those basic things that people often look over.
I can share like based on the experience, I probably wouldn't do things in the order that we did, knowing what we know now. But yeah, we met a lot. I would say every 2 weeks, either every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, since August 2022 up to the days of the youth summit, which happened in July. I think as we got closer, we were meeting weekly, and then it turned into a couple times a week, just to make sure that we were on top of things and had everything was taken care of. But I think it was just a continuous of following up, continuing to follow up throughout, and then continuing to invite community members to be involved in a part of the planning.
Thank you. Yeah, Leha. Yeah, go ahead.
I think, one of the things for me it's building the partnerships, building community relationships, and making sure that we all work together as one, collaborating. I know there was no hierarchical system in this. Everybody had a voice, and everybody's voice is heard. And we talk about decolonization within tribal communities, which is like taking things back to our traditional way, and that's kind of how this youth summit was run. Was everybody had input. There were no like chairpersons, or it was very important to have that level of everybody had a voice, and everybody's voice is heard, especially with the speakers, and that we needed to have that community effort in order for it to be a success. And so that's the advice I would give, is just to make sure everybody's has input within a project. That's how it becomes a success.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful. Everybody had a voice and everybody's voice was heard. Thank you, Lehan. Thank you, Cass. I know Big Wind had to step off, but a huge thank you to them as well. And to everyone who attended, thank you so much. We have been honored to have this entire series, and especially honored to have this session today. As you leave the Zoom room, you will see a survey pop up. Please take it, give us some feedback. That's also how you can get your survey of, or your certificate of completion. We will be sending out links to all of, or a document with all of the links mentioned today, as well as information on Cass, Leha, Big Wind, how you can stay connected, coming up in the next couple of days. And we hope that you all have a wonderful week. Thank you for being here with us. We are going to open the waiting room now and start putting people in the waiting room so that we can do a debrief with Cass and Leha. So if you get booted, that's why, but we still like you and we can't wait to see you again. Hi, we're back. Yay, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course. How did that feel for you both? I will stop. Oh, I will also stop recording. I always